Thank you. I want to recognize and welcome everybody out to this Regional Growth Committee. This is Thursday, January 18th. The time is now, I believe, 9:18. Running a little bit short with personnel. I believe a number of them may still be on Capitol Hill on their way down. We do have some information I want to share today, so if you'll work with us on that, we'll get started. First, we'd like to ask if we can go around the table and do some introductions, and then we'll ask Andrea if she'll notify or identify the people who are actually Zooming in with us today. Let's start up here. Thank you, Jordan.
Jordan with WFRC.
Okay.
Andrea with WFRC.
Bob Dandoy, Roy City.
Ted Knowlton, I'm the Deputy Director at WFRC. I'm also your point of contact for the Regional Growth Committee.
Bryce Bird, Division of Air Quality Staff.
Allison Stroud, Council Member, Sandy City.
Hi, Megan Townsend, Wasatch Front Regional Council staff.
Yes.
Nick Norris, Salt Lake City. Rex Harris with FHWA.
Tim Watkins, new with WFRC, Community Planner.
Byron Head, WFRC staff.
Julie Bjornstad, WFRC Long Range Planning Group.
Lauren Victor, WFRC staff.
Hugh Van Wagen, WFRC staff.
Matt Ryan, WFRC staff.
Madison Aviles, WFRC.
Morning, Marsha White, WFRC staff, Economic Development.
Andrea Olson, UDOT Planning.
Jory Johnner, WFRC staff, Long Range Planning Group.
Okay. Hey, thank you. And thanks for joining us. I know we began this meeting at 9:15. That's a little unusual for us, but we certainly believe it's the good thing because there's so many things happening today and we like to take time to get started early. Yes, I was just going to ask you if you would then, would you identify the individuals we do have on the Zoom meeting today? Andrea?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We have Mayor Zoltansky, Kendall Thomas, Kevin Cromar, Laura Hanson, Kevin Van Tassel, Lauren Palmer, Ivan Marrero, Nicole Bordeaux, Brian Horrocks, and Ari Bruning at present. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for those who have Zoomed in on us. I just for the record like to verify, and Andrea, you can confirm this, do we have a full quorum?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we can get started. We do have an action item. First thing, this will be under the consent items. Specifically, the action is the minutes from the Regional Growth Committee meeting was held on October 19th, 2023. Is there any comments or questions or modifications to those minutes? Okay, hearing none. Then do I have a motion then to approve those minutes?
This is Kendall Thomas from Twilla County. I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, do I have a second?
Garrett will second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I think we got a majority. Opposed? Hearing none. Okay, those minutes are approved. Thank you. This is a public comment time. If you have comments you'd like to make, please give us your name and the organization that you're affiliated with. Any public comments? Okay, seeing none here. Andrea, do you see any on the Zoom meeting? Okay, I don't see any either. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move past our public comment period. Number 3 is the review of the draft goals for the 2023 to 2027 regional planning process, the Wasatch Choice Vision, a regional transportation plan. Now, as you know, the Wasatch Choice Vision, that includes the regional transportation plan, is our shared planning, framework. It is developed collaboratively and addresses transportation, land use, economical opportunities, and parks and public spaces. Today, we're going to talk about the key goals to address in the next upcoming vision. Now, you might think, why are we talking about the next plan a year after adopting the last plan? The reason is that we believe we live in a dynamic, changing world, and state. We're growing fast. There are disruptions. So we are always working to refine and enhance our planning and plans for the future. In addition, developing a regional plan through collaborative efforts takes time. It is a multi-year process with extensive input and a rigorous technical process. I'm going to turn some time now over to Ted to introduce this topic. Ted?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so the main thing here is we're going to share statements to guide this upcoming regional planning process for discussion and comment by the Regional Growth Committee. And as we, before we get into that, just a couple of things to note. I did press it. You may remember in October, we asked you a somewhat related question, which is what should we focus on in this calendar year? So I'll share a summary of that because it's relevant for this question of what principles might guide our upcoming regional planning process. And then we'll talk through those principles for discussion. This is part of the reason why a regional planning process, an update to the Wasatch Choice Vision and the Regional Transportation Plan, it takes a bit of time. We discuss changes. That can mean new transportation projects. It can mean understanding local and regional vision for land use and economic development. That's a process. We need to come together and think about how those ideas work well together, how they function technically, and have a discussion and refine them. That's that 2025 part of this. And then it takes us about a year to prioritize and work out the details. So it's a process, and you can think of this, it makes sense, if you will, when you're coordinating across an entire regional area with local governments, various transportation agencies. Transportation affects so many people. It interacts so much with land use. It just takes a bit of time to work through this. Now, all of this is an update, would be an update to our shared Wasatch Choice Vision. I think you're all familiar with this, but the Wasatch Choice Vision is our regional long-term framework for coordinating transportation, land use, and economic development. It's a framework. It doesn't get into the details of all of that, but it's very collaborative. It's generated as a grassroots effort involving local governments and many, many partners that I will not name just for the sake of time. As we update the regional plan, we will build on the vision as well as the key strategies that are embedded in it, which are, let's provide transportation choices, housing options, parks and public spaces, and city and town centers so that we have both a thriving local governments and a thriving region. Okay, now let's get into that first thing that I said we would do, which is what's the summary of your feedback from October? We asked the question, in the issues in which you'd like to focus, what actions should we explore? By the way, the issues are consistent with Wasatch Choice. You said, let's focus, in addition to transportation, our main focus should be on housing. That's what you said in October. Now, I won't read all of these statements, but mainly just focus on the bolded statement. You said, let's coordinate actions between agencies involved in any plan. Let's do a better job of communications. You said, yes, let's strengthen centers. Let's help cities to develop centers. These are verbatim statements from you in the small unbolded text. Let's support local governments. Quote, some cities that have more space for housing do not have city planners, economic development directors, etc. You said, let's prepare for new technologies and uncertainties like drone deliveries. Let's address environmental issues, such as the relationship between water availability and population growth. And you also said, let's dig into some new transportation details. And one example is cleaning distribution. I will confess, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Cleaning distribution and last mile delivery fleets. So this is a summary of what you said back in October. And as you think about these major bases that you hit on, hopefully you'll see them reflected in this draft set of guiding principles that we'd like to chat with you about here today. So guiding principles, this is not a statement of the totality of what our shared regional plan process will get at. The idea with these is, what should we focus on? And then with your guidance and feedback on what these principles ought to be, then we as staff, we can come back and share with you progress on them through the plan process. This is a plan process that will conclude in 2027. So whether you're new on Regional Growth Committee or you've been on it for a couple of years, this is a great opportunity for us to think together about how do we coordinate local and regional actions to maintain a great quality of life as we update the vision and the regional transportation plan. Okay, now let's get into it. By the way, please interrupt or stop me with questions or comments anytime, but I will pause and look for some comments as well. This is just a high level, and then we'll read each statement briefly and discuss. Engage and communicate, coordinate multimodal transportation, aspirational opportunities, consider external forces and uncertainties, explore policies too. We'll explain what is meant by that. Enhance our performance-based planning and have balance in our planning. Now, some of these are vague statements. As we give you the full statement, hopefully it'll become clear. I just want to give you a sense of where we're headed. We're going to talk about 8 guiding principles. By the way, joining with me on this is Julie Bjornstad, who leads our performance-based planning work here at WFRC and is also just generally awesome. So I'll do the first 4, and then Julie will take the next 4. We'd like to have you share any thoughts you've got on individual principles, and then after we get through all 8, we'll also just love to hear what you think about them as a group. Any reflections you've got on them as a group of statements. Some of these are things that we've always focused on, but they bear just continued focus. Number 1 is an example. Regularly engage and communicate with partner agencies, stakeholders, communities, and the public. I'll say that a couple of our particular, what we've heard from you, what we've heard from transportation agencies, what we've heard from the public, 2 things that we might focus on there, perhaps a more robust, broader public engagement. And then also, how do we make sure that we hear from the underrepresented voices in our region? Any comments or thoughts on item 1 before I go to the second one?
Well, thank you, Ted. Let me just ask this question. Certainly, when it talks about public engagement, I have found it so useful if in fact it's a town hall where people can actually stand up rather than fill out a survey or some type of a comment sheet. They can stand up and voice their position or concerns. Because this is such a broad, regional effort, has there been any thought about how we might be able to localize these into town hall sessions on these guiding principles? Because there's lots of things where we can actually allow people to stand up. Certainly we invite anybody and everybody here, but there, unless it's a really sensitive or difficult issue, I don't know if we're getting that voice where people feel comfortable standing up and doing that. Is there a way by which we might, or is there thinking of how we might get much more public engagement by taking the message into the communities and then say, hey, if you want to talk about these things, please show up to a library or a town hall discussion?
Okay, I think that's a great idea. And Mr. Chair, one thing we could do is we could come with our public engagement game plan for discussion and refinement even in our next meeting. But we could take that and think about that as we prepare that. That's one idea on that.
I'll
Andrew?
relieve a little pressure off of Ted by saying that I don't think our goal for this discussion is to necessarily make final decisions about how we're going to approach these things, but encourage thoughts and ideas and brainstorming as we look ahead. Is that fair, Ted?
That's fair.
Okay.
Okay.
have to
yes,
add,
please.
Mr. Chair, if I may. And public engagement, sometimes when you have really these broad, big ideas and broad components to planning, it can be a little overwhelming. So public engagement, I've found in our master planning process in Sandy, when we go from the macro to the micro, it's layers. So we have been successful in building public engagement for our city planning, which to most residents, they don't, have time to think deeply about it. But what we've done is we've had the town halls where it's dedicated time with, put your ideas up on the whiteboard and post it and all these different exercises. But we've also had booths at our city events so we take it to the people where the people are, or, and if it's transit, at an event where people are using transit to get to and from, and just so that there's a lot of different touches. So it's not just one thing and the people that happen to come that one night or one survey, but it's a lot of layers of opportunities for contact. And then even if they're not participating in the survey, at least they're identifying, oh, this is happening. This is my local government wanting my input. And so they're going to be more inclined if they see something in the Sandy Journal or in a newsletter, and they'll start to put the pieces together. So it's really the building blocks. And when you're talking about regional transportation, wow, even for us who are steeped in it, it can be very overwhelming. But when you digest it down into smaller blocks or smaller opportunities, so you have both the big events and then you have the smaller touches. So that's what's worked for me in Sandy.
Appreciate that, Mayor. Lots of opportunities that are easy to access, simple in the way that we talk about something that has some inherent complexity in it. Those are excellent points that we'll seek to build on as well. Anything else on that one? Go ahead.
Ted, I think there's, Ms. Hanson has a hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually was going to comment on number 2, but I can, I thought we were doing all 4 at the same time. So I apologize, Ted. If you want to.
That's okay, Laura. Go ahead and jump in with item 2.
Okay, sorry. So what I was going to comment on, this is not necessarily a change that we need to make to the guiding principles right now. I don't think it's quite ripe yet, but something for us all to be thinking about as we work through this process and kind of the next few years. I see an increasing need to coordinate energy and transmission with our transportation network. As we grow with the electrification of cars and our transportation system over time, I can just see there being a need to make that connection at some point in the future. So again, I don't think it's ripe right now. It's more just a heads up that it's something that I think will be emerging that we need to be thinking about.
And I'm going to make an obvious statement, but we are making notes about all of this that is being discussed, even though I'm not literally doing it myself.
I think we have a comment from Professor. Go ahead.
Professor Ewing, you're muted if you're trying to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought I'd unmuted. Good morning. A final exam question in land use and transportation. The course I teach at the U is virtually the same thing. What does it mean to coordinate land use and transportation? I would ask, I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'd be more interested in hearing from Ted, Andrew, staff, what you mean by that? And what specific policies, strategies, et cetera, are used to coordinate land use and transportation. And you've got, the TLC program, which is a wonderful example. And you've got land use and transportation modeling, which are wonderful examples. I'm just wondering if that's what you had in mind. And I won't grade you.
Professor Ewing, thanks a lot for the great question. And I'll first say that what we're talking about on this is the update to the Wasatch Choice Vision and the Regional Transportation Plan. In other words, it's not about the totality of what we do at WFRC. However, there is a key question we have for the Regional Growth Committee on this very item. We're thinking that it's one thing to note is it's been 8 years since city councilors, elected officials around the region have weighed in on the question of how much growth should occur within city and town centers, regionally and locally. Or locally, what's the location and type of center that each community would like? In other words, visioning. Now, it's per our introduction to this item, it's a little bit funny to talk about visioning when we've just celebrated the adoption of a vision. But it has been 8 years. We could do this in a way that is not from scratch, but we could still have that conversation regionally about how much growth and the type of growth within centers. That's one thing that we're thinking about and would love to get feedback from RGC on. And the second is, you said, hey, we ought to focus more on housing. And so maybe in that process, we have a little bit more information and questions about how does all this add up to affect our housing challenges and issues regionally. So as a kind of one level down from that broader statement, Professor, that's the way I would answer it, and also pose that as a question to Regional Growth Committee.
Go ahead, Beth.
And just to finish the thought.
Professor Ewing, can you, Beth Holbrook was about to make a comment also, and then we can come back to you. Okay?
Excuse me.
No problem. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I really love where this discussion is going, because I do think that there is always this challenge of how do you articulate a vision and how do you get that out into multiple layers of governmental entities, the public. It's an ongoing, constant discussion. And I think that when you're talking about, and if I don't want to make a presumption necessarily, but I do think that only having one layer of discussion about what is a town center, because town center, when I hear that, I think, oh, look, that's mom and pop, right?
Okay.
What does that actually mean though? Like, are we looking at this from a regional perspective, which I think is exactly what we want to be looking at? What the size of that is also a value, no question. But I think how we communicate that moving forward, I think that there is a real value to talking about how this interconnectedness helps. And it helps with land use decision-making. It helps with understanding the transit connection pieces to these centers and really trying to navigate that. And I've said this for a while, and I always think when cities start to have these discussions, I think getting this to the planning commission level also adds an incredible amount of value. So I just want to make that comment. Thank you so much.
Okay, Professor, go ahead. Make a comment.
So your emphasis on centers is, I think, exactly right. We've studied the polycentric plans of 3 regions, Denver, Seattle, and Portland. And I think I've said before that the the dominant paradigm now in regional planning is polycentric with good transit connections between the centers. What I would do rather than taking a lot of time here is send you a copy of the case studies, which are in process at a journal being published. And everyone has a different approach to creating polycentric development. Portland, Seattle, and Denver, all different and different from yours, but they might be instructive as you look ahead to, the next effort to create polycentric development.
And Professor, we can send that out to the committee in the coming days too, per your suggestion.
Good, thank you. Very good. One last thing. When the answer to the question, when I ask it on the final, the short answer is having the transportation supply equal the land use demand or be consistent with the land use demand. So if we have light rail running down North Temple, we want density along light rail lines. And if we build additional centers or develop additional centers, we want adequate highway capacity to serve them. And so it's always a supply demand thing. If you think of it that way, you end up with bike lanes on streets that are going to carry a lot of students to the university who use bikes and so on. So that's just the answer I look for on the final exam.
Okay, we look forward to the test. Let's see, the third item, this is a lot for us to work on, which is perfect. It's great feedback. The item 3 is plan and fund multimodal transportation choices, state and local roads, transit, and active transportation. That is a core principle. It is consistent with the Wasatch Choice strategy of transportation choices. The next one is a new focus that I'll just spend 1 minute on: explore aspirational opportunities for transportation and land use in a pragmatic way, balanced with pragmatic consideration of costs. Now, I will give you an example. Those of you that participated, can you forward the slide, please? Go ahead and one more, 2, 3 more, 4 more, 5 more. That's good. Now go back 1. All right, sorry for that. Those of you that were in our fall workshops know that this is an important time for active transportation with the new development of the Utah Trail Network. This is UDOT-led effort to figure out what are the highest quality, family-friendly, safe, protected routes that get us to key destinations. And they can't possibly get us everywhere we want to go, just like an interstate can't. And so we also talked about a companion network that we're calling in the Beehive Bikeways. Both of those concepts are more aggressive than adopted plans, including the Regional Transportation Plan for Active Transportation. So they're aspirational. They aspire for something more, which doesn't mean pie in the sky or wait a few decades. There's an open question. Should we work to do something better on particular corridors? Well, we could do the same kind of thing for streets, roads, and public transportation as well. So this is a a thing that we're thinking makes sense for this process. Would love to get your thoughts on that. That's the end of that 4. And I will actually pause for you to reflect on that if you want, as I invite Julie up here for the next 4. Hopefully it made sense, that aspirational. I'll do one more sentence on that while you're thinking about it. We practice good government of ensuring that our plan is fiscally constrained. It's a long-range plan. It goes out to 2050, but we ask ourselves, how much revenue do we think we will have? And let's live within our means. Sometimes aspirational projects can cost more. So it might be that by establishing a vision for transportation that's not necessarily fiscally constrained, we can identify where do we eventually want to go with some transportation ideas. Is there anything on the, go ahead, trustee.
And we're learning this a little bit in transit, you know, because we've always constrained ourselves. And so we never understood the full vision. And I think there's, you know, it's a two-edged sword, because you could, if you're aspirational, you lead some to believe, well, that's going to happen. It was on the plan. On the other hand, you don't know where it is that people ultimately want to go in that process. And so I think, and so it doesn't put you in a position where if there's a opportunity to combine it with something else that it, you know, that maybe is fiscally constrained, there could be an opportunity there that wouldn't present itself otherwise. And so I think it's okay to vision and just somehow park it as a vision so that those expectations are measured. But I think we kind of shortchange ourselves when we don't include the vision piece.
Okay, so I'll just wrap up with the sort of last 4 guiding principles that are aligned a lot with the regional transportation plan that we'll be developing over the next 4 years. The first is considering external forces and uncertainties as we make these collaborative decisions. In the 2023 RTP that we just wrapped up, we had a big focus on this, looking at different technologies and different policies that were coming. You guys mentioned your feedback from the last RGC about drones, more e-bikes, e-shopping. And so we're planning on continuing that work in this RTP, looking a little bit more detail about things have happened over the last 4 years. What does that, how does that impact us? We know we have drone delivery here locally. There's a lot of effort in the advanced air mobility space and how that can impact us. And this will also be an eye towards local governments and how they can prepare for potential external forces and uncertainties that may be coming. We'll also be continuing our work on policies that complement and optimize transportation investments. Things like managed motorways, ramp metering, curbside management, ways that we've built a lot of capacity. We have plans to build more capacity, but how can we get the most out of the capacity that we've already built or are planning to build? And then Ted mentioned earlier, utilizing a performance-based approach to planning and understanding our implementation progress. We do that in all of the efforts that we do here at WFRC, whether that's the development of the RTP, how we score projects for TLC, the SEDS document, and how we give federal funding out. And this is just a...
Julie, you're gonna have to put several quarters in the cup because you just ran through a string of acronyms.
Well, everybody here should know those by now. Fine. Okay, we're gonna have to pause the next agenda item if I have to go through all these. The Regional Transportation Plan. What did I say? The TLC, Transportation and Land Use Connection Program.
And the SEDS, the test.
Okay, what is up with you and Professor Ewing on the test today? Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, did I say anything else?
No.
No, okay.
But we'll let you know if you do.
Okay. So this is just a kind of a nod to that approach that we've been doing, continuing to strengthen it. And then one of the big things I'll touch on is the understanding our implementation. We're working right now on what we're calling the Big Five. So it's the beginning of our progress monitoring work. We're looking at how our region's access to opportunity, which you might also know as ATO, how our access to transportation choices, our access to park space, our implementation of centers, And there's a fifth one that I forgot. Not in school anymore, so I don't need to know everything all the time. Housing expenses, so housing and transportation, how those 5 big performance measures over time are changing in the region. And then the last one that we'll be working on, and this is a very long one, so bear with me. Balanced planning for growth and transportation capacity, maintenance and operations, local needs, and flexibility in responding to changing circumstances when developing financially constrained transportation needs. So what that means is that as we work through the plan and prioritize our investments, thinking through that the money that we have isn't just for capacity. We also need to maintain and operate the system that exists and the system that we're building, that there's a balance between sort of our state roads and also our local needs that are happening, whether those are, highways versus collectors or front runner versus local buses. And then that there may be times that we need to be flexible and changing circumstances. So maybe we didn't foresee some area growing faster than other areas, or there's an earthquake and we need more money on the maintenance side. And so being flexible in how we implement. And so those are the last 4 guiding principles. And if anybody wants to help wordsmith number 8 after this meeting is over, let us know. So reactions to those 4 comments, things that we should be thinking about as we work through the plan.
Any comments on that? Please, Bryce.
Just on bullet number 5, Bryce Bird with the Division of Air Quality, and that will also tell you what I'm going to talk about. The external forces, we have a future agenda item to talk about one of those external forces, but as we're looking forward, we're seeing more constrained air quality concerns. We have the growth we have to accommodate on the air quality side. We still have significant challenges, winter inversions, which we all saw this past few weeks, and we will see again shortly as well. And what that does to basically rethinking how we do everything we do. We can't continue to add 50,000 people a year and do it the way we did it before. We have to look at every opportunity we have to reduce emissions. And I think that was already discussed a little bit with electric vehicle. There's that electric infrastructure planning effort that's ongoing right now, but looking at some of those external forces, making sure that we're looking forward enough to be able to accommodate growth, but also meet the current standards in the situation we're in right now. And it's been a great partnership to this point, but maybe we have to redouble those efforts in the future in order to accommodate.
Yeah, for sure. The air quality, I think, hits on a number of those, including number 8, the flexibility in responding to changing circumstances. And so that's a good point. I mean, I think in the last plan with like electric vehicles, we kind of felt like it wasn't changing travel behavior and didn't look at it maybe as hard as we could. Now with new funding sources, a lot of work that's being done on both the transit and active transportation and roadside, I think it's going to be a bigger role in this plan about how we plan for that, where we're putting charging stations, the electric grid, and how we can plan for all of that needs to get done.
Okay, I mentioned one more to think about, and that is construction equipment. And so we have the way we construct roads now. We have our bidding process that focuses on lowest cost, best product, things like that. But there are real air quality impacts to using the old construction equipment that the low bidder may provide, but maybe that should be a focus and a part of the planning process to account for and accommodate those emissions as part of the construction process as well.
Good point.
Please.
Just one thought, and I'm far from an expert on this topic, but your one comment about if we had an earthquake, but actually in a lot of the FEMA training I've been through, that if you have good plans and you sort of know what you would want to do in a sort of a worst case scenario, like if we often deal with the current circumstances, but heaven forbid that circumstance is wiped out. And what you come back with also leads itself to what federal restorative funds would fund. And so sometimes you can come back and fund something the way you want to do it. So in that longer range plan, I think it does as well to at least be able to articulate what that vision would be, because the ability to sort of get those funds and to implement them goes a lot faster if you actually have adopted community plans that would allow that. So something to keep in mind, not obviously park around, but if you're looking at a phase 3 or something, what would that really want to be if you had that choice?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Anything online?
And Mr. Chair, that's
Please.
the end of our presentation, and if there are any sort of broader reflections on this list of guiding principles, we will certainly wordsmith them a little bit. But, and then we will build on the comments and questions that have come through this as we work with you to undertake this planning process over the next few years.
Okay, thank you.
Just no pressure for anybody. It's just the future of our region for the decades to come. So, yeah, no pressure.
Good way of putting it. Thank you. Great presentation. Okay, let's move to action, or number 4 action. This is a stationary plan certification request. 13 stations in the downtown Salt Lake City. The Wasatch Choice is planning framework for our region, although planning and zoning details are worked out with each community. Stationary planning is an effort to work through those details around transit stations, which are key areas to effectively accommodate growth. Now, many Wasatch Choice centers are developed around these transit stations. Under House Bill 462, as many of you may remember, in 2022, cities with transit stations are required to develop a stationary plan. Cities decide how to do it and maintain their local control over land use. Now, the Wasatch Regional Council is given the responsibility to certify those stationary plans and satisfy the statutory requirements. Today, we will consider all stationary plan areas in the downtown Salt Lake City for certification. Megan Townsend will introduce this item, and I know we have a number of representatives from Salt Lake City to help her. So turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so as Mayor Dandoy said, we'll talk about station area planning today. We're going to talk about certifying not 1, not 2, but 13 stations in our metropolitan cities downtown. So speaking of implementing centers, that's exactly what Salt Lake City has been doing for years and years, and we'll talk about that a bit today. And I'll also give you a brief update just on stationary planning and how it's going in general. So as always, here's our little progress update timeline, sort of showing you where each of the 126 station areas, as many of these cities that have the responsibility to do this have a station whose half-mile radius goes beyond their city, or another city's station has a half-mile radius that comes into their city. So we have 126 station areas we're reporting data to you on. This is the timeline kind of showing where they're all at. There's 26 out there that those cities are busy working on other stations, so they're waiting to be planned. Another 80 or so somewhere in the works, either with some existing planning or they're working on a plan now. And we have 13. That's the 13 downtown stations you'll hear today that have been submitted to us for certification, and 4 that have been certified already. So depending on how today and our council meeting next week goes, we might be really adding to that 4. We also have 19 applications that have come to us for technical assistance on this work. That includes applications that have come, all of these, this includes the MAG region as well, the Mountain Land Association of Governments. So we're working with on 19 different station area plans, some of those involving several stations. So that's really great to see that technical assistance being put to use. So today we're considering that 13 there. I do want to say we're also working with the Mountain Land Association of Governments on a online map that will kind of do a better job of showing you where all of this data is applied. So you'll be able to open that map, see which stations, especially stations in your community, make sure we've got it right. We've got your status correct, be able to open that map and see completed deliverables or where each of these stations are at. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to bring that to you soon. Here's a reminder of the station area plan, the goals or objectives of station area planning that are part of the statute. That is to increase the availability and affordability of housing, to promote sustainable environmental conditions, to enhance access to opportunities, and to increase transportation choices and connections. And as I was talking about a bit earlier, the MPOs have this technical assistance money to help you do that. We have $5 million between the 2 MPOs. We're about halfway through that fund. So if your city needs to be working on a station area plan, go ahead and apply. It's available anytime. Normally, I would tell you about the 5 components that are required to be part of a station area plan here. Today, I want to talk about a different piece of the statute, which is it allows cities to certify a station area based on prior actions. That's how we would be considering the 13 downtown stations today. So let's go through this a little bit. This provision allows for cities that have been making great strides in implementing TOD to count that work toward certifying a station area. And it needs to be, those actions can be anything from adopted plans and ordinances, approved land use applications, agreements and financing, investments, and other things the city may have done prior to June of 2022 to implement transit-oriented development and meet those objectives without necessarily having a plan that has those 5 components. And this was done to recognize cities just like Salt Lake City who have been working on this for a really long time, and they have a lot of progress to show. In addition to that, these prior actions need to uphold those 4 objectives. They also need to be relevant to making meaningful progress going forward, meaning whatever ordinances are in place, whatever plans have been adopted, whatever investments the city has underway, maybe it's a CRA or maybe it's investing in some active transportation facilities and things like that. Those all need to be able to, the city needs to be able to demonstrate that they can keep making progress going forward, that it doesn't end there. The municipality also needs to adopt a resolution stating that they've done these things, and that's what we will be considering for Salt Lake City today. So here are the 13 stations that we're looking at, and I have a screenshot from our online map up there that shows downtown Salt Lake City, one of our 3 metropolitan centers in the vision, and it's just this, giant blob of station areas because Salt Lake City downtown has lots of station areas that are closer together than a half mile. And so you see all of these station areas overlap. We received this resolution from Salt Lake City, and while we see the merit of all of downtown together, we also wanted to look station by station. So our staff did an analysis to make sure that each of these station areas stand on their own in meeting the objectives. And then, of course, you can see how overlapped they are. Downtown together really makes a case here. So those stations include 900 South, 600 South, Courthouse, Gallivan, City Center, Temple Square, Arena, the Planetarium, Old Greektown, Salt Lake Central Frontrunner, North Temple, Bridge/Guadalupe Tracks, and North Temple Frontrunner. I wish I had the actual conductor's voice to read through that, because you can just picture yourself going through downtown on our tracks system and hearing that voice. So that's what we'll be considering today. And I want to give a little time to the city to talk about all the great work they've done, but I just want to point out the downtown plan covers most of this area, the Salt Lake City Downtown Master Plan. And that plan includes things like the Green Loop, which a map is shown here, and you hear the mayor of Salt Lake City talk about all the time, implementing this Green Loop, this fantastic both active transportation and just recreation amenity that goes throughout the downtown. That plan also includes a goal to build 10,000 new housing units. That plan was adopted in 2016, and the city's almost there. I think they have about 9,000 of those units built, or maybe going under development. So the city's doing a great job in implementing many of the things in that downtown plan. There are other plans that are included in these station areas as well that I'll list, and that includes the Ballpark Station Area Plan. That's a plan that we've actually certified. The Ballpark Station was certified. The West Side Plan, the North Temple Boulevard Plan, Capitol Hill Plan, the Avenues Community Plan, and the Central Community Plan. So Salt Lake City's been doing a lot of planning. It kind of, all these overlapping station areas and these plans kind of, they don't meet the exact boundaries here, but you can see on this map that, the station areas are covered by these various plans. Along with these plans, there's a wide variety of investments that have been made, ordinances in place, development underway, and I want to give Nick Norris, Salt Lake City Planning Director, a minute to tell you about all the great things that Salt Lake City is doing.
Thank you. I'm Nick Norris. I'm the Planning Director for Salt Lake City, and just wanted to touch on a few things. Not so much in the past, but wanted to bring up that the city's very first adopted plan, which was in the early 1900s, identified the things that are now listed in the stationary planning bill in state code is things the city should be doing. So we were doing this for 100 years before, well, before it was cool in planning circles, and certainly for 100 years before the state thought every city should do it. And so we have a long track record of implementing these policies and investments and working with the private sector to bring these things to fruition. We are a very action-driven planning department in the city, so we like to focus on getting things in place so things that align with city goals are easy to realize. That's our motto, that's our goal. And I wanted to highlight some of the additional things that we have going on in the future, because one of the things that I think is a little ironic about the stationary planning stuff is that to certify past actions, not only do you have to show that you've adopted policies and put them in place, but you have to actually show you've done the work. Whereas if we were creating a new stationary plan, all we need to do is create the plan. We don't need to show any work on it. And so it's actually a higher bar to establish the work we've already done. Meg brought up a couple of projects and things that the city's working on. The Green Loop is probably the most significant public project that the city is endeavoring on and has endeavored on in decades. It'll add dozens of acres of public open space and park space to our downtown, which is severely lacking in it. And we have a goal of having that completed by 2034. So that's a very ambitious project that will repurpose existing right-of-way for a variety of transportation modes, parks, games, places for people to be outside, especially near where we are seeing most of our density being built.
Nick, you said 2034. Is something happening in 2034 that we should be aware of?
Seems like it, but yeah, the goal is to have this completed in time for the 2034 Winter Olympics. So early 2034. We also are continually investing in affordable housing in our downtown. Like I've said, we've long had principles that we should grow where our infrastructure can support it. That includes our hard infrastructure, including transportation, but also our soft infrastructure, our amenities, our culture, and the types of things that people like to do in their daily lives. And so we continue to make those investments. We are continually and always analyzing particularly our zoning code to make sure that it is supportive of city goals. In fact, a couple of highlights that we've done recently in the downtown area is that we've completely removed parking minimums in our downtown. Most of the downtown area has unlimited building height, and so zoning is not restrictive of those types of things. What we have in store moving forward is expanding those kinds of principles, and particularly expanding with a goal of expanding areas and removing barriers for small businesses to be located on our key streets downtown, so that we have a place for not just businesses to operate, but to support entrepreneurship, promote our local, the ability to spend our money locally, and also give people destinations in our downtown. We want this to be a neighborhood, not just a financial district like you see in so many cities. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Can I just note, you have these pictures on the screen of various developments that have either happened or are happening. The photo in the lower right of your screen, that's right here at the gateway. And so when you walk out, when you walk out the door of our office today, just look immediately to your left and you'll see that development, that new hotel on top of the Rio Grande train station. Do I have that right? Union Pacific train station. Thank you, Carlton. I knew Carlton would know that. That was a test, by the way, test 3 in the meeting. That development happening right there, Nick, to your point, sort of to enliven this area that's well served by transit. There's a lot of amenities and to bring housing and a mix of uses into this area. And so just right when you walk out, just look to your left and you'll see that happening.
Yeah, I think one thing I didn't add, but we like to tell people that if you want to see how, the measures that the city's taken to support transit-oriented development, is give us 20 minutes to give you a tour of our downtown, and you'll easily be able to see it without us having to talk about planning and land use and zoning and everything else. So.
Thanks, Nick. So Andrew stole my punchline. But I wanted to note, we're sitting right in this area now, and you can see a lot of this around you. I'll just note these are just images I grabbed that are right adjacent to a transit station, but these station areas are much bigger than that, right? So there's things like Astra Tower going in. It's one of the largest residential development the city's seen, I believe. Anyway, you know, there's all kinds of development throughout the city, but these are all of these images are right adjacent to a transit station, so you can see it happening right there along our transit line. Let's see, within your packets, you'll find everything that's required for us to consider a certification, including a resolution that the Wasatch Front Regional Council would sign certifying these station areas, resolution that Salt Lake City adopted, as well as our staff findings analysis, which we, in consultation with UTA, have gone through all of these materials and are making a positive recommendation for certification of these 13 downtown stations. I will turn it back to the chair for any discussion or questions.
Thank you. We do have some comments. I believe Kevin Cromer, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you. As for Mr. Norris, I wanted to ask a little bit about the building height restrictions. I know this is something common for most metropolitan areas. Can you give us an example of a city that had too lenient of building height restrictions that then later regretted it? I know we have aggressive building height limits, but can you think of any example where, you know, a city had too high of limits and they said, oh, we wish we would have had it more stringent? Can you talk us through that a little bit, that thinking?
I'm actually not aware of a city that felt that way that has an urban core. You can look at a lot of cities around the country, particularly bigger. You know, Salt Lake City in the grand scheme of things is a relatively small urban core compared to a lot of big cities, but we have a lot of characteristics that a lot of the big cities have. And decades ago, many of those big cities actually downzoned and reduced building heights, and many of them are now going the opposite direction, including places like New York City, where they're looking at increasing building heights in areas where it's pretty controversial. I think one of the realities is that as cities get built out and develop, their only option is to go up. And so I think that's what most cities are doing versus urban cores regretting that. That doesn't mean it's not a challenge. There's lots of challenges with building vertical. Staging construction is really hard, really expensive. You often have to upgrade all kinds of utility service just to get the building to function. And those are all expensive endeavors. And as everybody who's been in downtown Salt Lake over the last 5 years knows, very inconvenient for a lot of other people who aren't associated with that development. So it's just a reality, but I'm not aware of cities that have regretted increasing building height in their urban cores.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Professor, I believe you have a question as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Nick? Yeah, we are under contractor will be soon with UTA to evaluate the station area plans. It's the Metropolitan Research Center. I have not looked at them yet, but we'll be studying them and commenting on them. Do you have standards in your plans with respect to the D variables, density, diversity, design, etc., or are they more general than that? In other words, we're shooting for a target density of 100 residents per acre on this particular site. How standards driven or guidelines driven are your plans?
So most of those standards are actually in our zoning code. As many people in Utah know, that if you put something that's a standard in a plan, it's advisory, and it doesn't have the same teeth as putting it in a land use regulation. So we prefer to have those in our land use regulations. for us, our plans identify the direction we want to go, and then our land use policies and laws help us get there. But we do have standards related to the various Ds. We believe that in our downtown, at least, the market drives density. And we don't feel like we need to establish minimum standards and things like that. Most of the developments you're seeing in downtown Salt Lake are well over 100 dwelling units per acre. But our plan actually calls for, and many of our zoning districts around the periphery of our downtown, including within the areas that would be considered part of the station area plan radius, supports all kinds of housing types. And you can look at the Central 9th Station, where we've seen densities increase from, like 10 dwelling units per acre. We don't have a ton of building height in those areas, but what we have seen is that development, most of those developments are pushing the 40 to 50 dwelling units per acre, even with townhomes. So we found a way to remove the zoning barriers that prohibit or limit density in that kind of context. And we believe it's fully effective and supporting transit. So
if I could, one quick additional, how about parking?
So most of our downtown has no parking minimums. The areas that are a little further from a transit station, the minimum parking requirements have been reduced by right to less, I think like half a stall per unit, plus the potential ability to reduce that further if you're providing affordable housing, or if you happen to be within a walking distance of a fixed rail transit station. Or I think we've included our high frequency bus network in that as well. So we've dropped them as far as we have the political support to drop them. But ideally, we would just eliminate parking minimums altogether and just let it be a market-driven approach.
Okay.
Thank
Great
you.
questions. Great
Thank
questions.
you.
Great response. Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Chair, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
For those that are kind of not super familiar with these stationary plans, I know you and Roy used one. How do we, as other cities that are smaller, we don't have really big town centers as it is, we're more, just suburbia. How do we use these town centers in some of these smaller cities and stationary planning?
I'll go ahead and take a shot at that. So the station area plan legislation is designed so that it maintains the local ability to plan in a way that works for your community. The objectives can be met in a lot of different ways. And we certainly aren't hoping to transpose downtown Salt Lake City onto some of your smaller communities. That would be preposterous. And so I would say the really best first step is for you or your staff to reach out to us, and we can talk through what a scope might look like. We have funding to do this, and we want to help you figure this out in a way that works for you and meets those objectives as well. And really that applies for station area planning as well as implementing any center, whether it's served by fixed rail or BRT or not. Any center requires looking at your community's context, your community's goals. And so it's not a one size fits all, as our league friends love to remind us.
Maybe this doesn't need to be said, but if you don't have a station that is subject to this requirement, you can still come and apply for the Transportation Land Use Connection Program to have assistance to help you achieve what you want to do as you implement centers or other key transportation or economic development issues in your community that relate to the vision.
Yeah, great response. Mayor Stenger, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of us, who may not necessarily have a transit station that can really benefit from what we've just been told. And so a great question, good answers. Thank you. Okay, Beth, you have a comment, a question?
I just wanted to thank you, Mayor, because I do think that even though structurally you might not have that level of density or development in your area. And I know that that is the case currently today. But some of the principles that even Nick talked about, and certainly what we've heard about from everyone else, you can translate that to a community of your size, thinking about how your transportation needs connect and intersect with the development that you're looking at for your town center, whatever that might look like, is still of good value. It's still an opportunity to connect with your residents, to understand their needs. So the principles behind it, I think, add value, even if structurally you're certainly not at the level of unlimited parking or any other these other components.
Great response. Carlson, thank you.
Sorry, I know there's a lot of comment. I just was going to say, when I first got elected in '97, the first TRAX line was under construction. And so really in my 16 years, I lived through the development of transit in Salt Lake. And I say this with great affection to Nick, because some of it's self-inflicted, but if there's a city that likes to do planning, it's Salt Lake City. And what's been fun to see, and probably since I departed from their council in the last 10 years, is the actual implementation of a lot of those plans taking place. And even just coming over here from our offices up First South, which at the time was a partially abandoned area, you know, there's high density housing being constructed along those corridors, and the park blocks behind this building that were kind of an oasis, if you will, at the time, you know, are heavily lined in that corridor. And so you actually do see the implementation of that. And I'm seeing housing and other, you know, uses in areas that I never, you know, even in sort of the dreamiest part of my service, never would have envisioned. And so, you know, kudos to them. And I think they certainly are reflective of the goals that the legislature set forth in here.
Yeah, great comment. Okay, any of the comments or questions before we move? Okay, next chart, thank you. With that then, I'd like to move to recommend, and this is a recommendation, this is not approval, we'll recommend that 13 downtown Salt Lake City station areas to the Wasatch Regional Council for certification. Is there a motion then to move for that recommendation?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to make that recommendation. Is there a second?
I'll second Mayor Zoltansky.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Okay, that recommendation go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Before
Great
we,
job.
I'm sorry, you have a comment?
Oh, I just
Oh.
said congratulations. Great job. That's a result of a lot of
Yeah.
work, a
Yeah,
massive
that's
amount of
perfect.
work. Very
Thank
elegant.
you.
Well done.
Before we move forward, I'd like to, if I can, recognize Mayor Tran. Welcome to the Regional Growth Committee. It's great to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah,
Looking
Mayor
forward to
of
participating.
Kaysville. So you're welcome, and man, it's going to be great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we'd like to go to item number 5. This is the Utah Legislative Session Overview. Now, Miranda Jones Cox is going to give us a brief overview of some of the things that are expected during the 2024 legislative session, including relevant transportation, housing, economic development, and land use, and other legislation and appropriations. So, Miranda, could you lead us out?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I'm actually coming to you all from up at the Capitol building right now. The session kicked off just this week, and we have 45 long but very short days as well to do all the things that we hope to accomplish while we're up here. And so I've got a few slides that I want to share that can kind of help guide this presentation and discussion. And really, you know, if anyone has any questions, of course, please feel free to ask me. But the legislative session this year goes until March 1st. So 45 days, like I mentioned, it's the shortest legislative session in the country. And so it's a very condensed and short timeline to get all these things done. So what is WFRC's role on Capitol Hill during the legislative session? And I was thinking about this and kind of think that there's three things. One, WFRC serves as a technical expert up on Capitol Hill to lawmakers to help inform them in their decision making as they're looking to appropriate and make new policies and change existing policies moving forward. And we, I think, pride ourselves in being that technical expert to help them in that process. Second, we're convener of our transportation partners, the transportation agencies, our other colleagues, and our local leaders to help get to consensus on these changes, on these bills, and help work with the legislature. And then lastly, we're an advocate here up on the Hill, specifically for appropriations and policies that further the Wasatch Choice Vision and Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. So I just want to share a little bit about kind of the legislative landscape, what we're wading into this legislative session, and what we can kind of expect. I will note a few things. One, the legislature has more of a limited surplus than it has had in years past to kind of work with as far as appropriations goes. In the years past, there's been, billions of dollars in one-time and ongoing surplus to spend on new programs, and for existing programs, and it's much more limited this year. And so with the tighter budget comes, less, the legislature may be less likely to fund certain things than they maybe would have been in years past. And so we're definitely keeping that in mind. But we do have to note that though there's not maybe quite as much surplus this year as there has been, the legislature really has invested heavily in multimodal transportation over the past 3 years. Specifically, last year with funding for the Active Transportation Investment Fund and funding the Utah Trail Network, funding for transit needs over the past few years, double tracking of Front Runner, et cetera, and then just additional ongoing funding for roadways, debt service, things like that. And so there's really been quite a bit of one-time and ongoing money put towards transportation. And we hope that will continue this year. We actually had a meeting this morning where the speaker and president met with us and shared some of their hopes that this session they'll be able to continue to invest in multimodal transportation funding. And so we hope to help support them in that. And then lastly, I want to just note that, while there are a lot of things happening up here on the Hill, one of the big focuses right now at the Capitol is housing. This maybe isn't news to you all, especially as, you hear these concerns and feel these pressures in your communities. But it is a big topic of discussion up here on the Hill that we're making sure that we keep tabs on those discussions. So that's the landscape. That's kind of what we're expecting moving into session. I will note that in addition to the priorities WFRC is approaching legislative session with, there are a number of other recommendations or priorities that have been released. So I'll note the governor's budget was released back in December. You'll see that here. Laura, I think Laura's here on the call. We actually also got a nice refresher this morning from Sophia DeCaro at the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, who was able to share a little bit of what is included in the governor's budget as far as infrastructure and transportation goes. But I will note that among these other policy recommendations from the Salt Lake Chamber, one of our partners, the the House Majority Caucus, House Minority Caucus, and the Senate Majority Caucus. Again, these legislative leadership groups are putting out policy recommendations. One of the core and key threads in regards to transportation is continuing to invest in multimodal transportation, which is something that we love to hear. I think Andrew mentioned that it's music to his ears of continuing to invest in multimodal. So just want to note these as resources out there for you if you want to look and see what some of the recommendations are out there moving into the beginning of the session. So a few things to watch. I mean, I don't really want to get into too many details, and it's still a little early to talk about, too many specific bills or appropriations, but there are a few kind of like core buckets that we're kind of watching some items being proposed and discussed. So again, first being multimodal transportation funding, one of the notable recommendations out of the governor's budget and that UDOT will be proposing to the legislature is funding for the Transit Transportation Investment Fund. So again, this is an ongoing source of funding for transit statewide. And in the governor's budget, there was a recommendation to put an additional 1% of funding from the Transportation Investment Fund into the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, continuing to provide additional ongoing stable funding for transit moving forward. So that's one that we're particularly interested in and focused on and working with our partners on. And I think no matter how we or UDOT or the legislature finds a way to get that funding to TTIF or to transit, that we're supportive of additional money for transit moving forward. Second is local transportation funding. Over the past few weeks, I've heard Speaker Mike Schultz say a few times that one thing he is keenly aware of is the transportation needs that locals are facing and the inadequacy of their funding sources that they have available to meet their transportation needs. So with that, one thing that we've been engaged in and working on along with some of our partners at Utah League of Cities and Towns and with the bill sponsor is the transportation utility fee. So a transportation utility fee is a fee that can already be imposed by local governments, cities, and have already been imposed. I think there's upwards of 15 cities now or so that have imposed a transportation utility fee. And the Utah Supreme Court ruled that this is an eligible fee, cities can impose it. And so in order to kind of avoid the legislature from, preempting cities from being able to impose this fee and also providing some reasonable guardrails and parameters around how the fee can be imposed, the structure in which a fee should or could be imposed, and then determining that the fee indeed is a reasonable use. That's what a bill that we've been working on with the sponsor to try and do to ensure that process and that procedure for that fee. And so the bill hasn't been released on that yet, but we're looking forward to that and those discussions. Second, infrastructure funding and financing. I'll note that there's a number of proposals out there around this. In the governor's budget, there was a recommendation for funding to be included, additional funding to be included in the state infrastructure bank, specifically to accommodate infrastructure in cities, to accommodate additional housing, and help with the governor's starter home initiative. But there are a number of other infrastructure proposals that are out there. And then lastly is housing. Like I said, this is the big issue this legislative session, and there's a lot that's kind of being swirled around right now, a lot of different proposals, a few different bills regarding land use changes, and it's still a little unclear right now exactly how the direction that everything is going to go in. And so Ted, I don't know if you have any thoughts or if you want to interject at all right here on housing before I wrap up, but feel free to if you'd like.
Thanks, Miranda. One of the things that is often talked about is the fact that if you think of housing needs in three broad buckets, there's a single family home demand, there's apartment condo demand, and then there's something in between, townhouse, small lot, single family home, duplex, and people often call that missing middle. And a lot of housing experts will identify that that's maybe our biggest area of need or one of our very biggest areas of need. It certainly relates to the governor's efforts on starter homes. There's things that can be done on that legislatively. And there's things that can be done, I think, through the Wasatch Choice Partnership. And how can we work together to help think through how the royal we works on the missing middle. And this is something that we've been putting together a game plan. It's kind of early of resources, tools, data, information on how maybe communities are doing if they want to know that, information on what some of the broader needs are so that we can kind of calibrate our planning to that. And I just wanted to mention that we can come back to Regional Growth Committee and unpack that missing middle housing initiative if it's of interest, but I certainly wanted you to be aware of it. It's kind of a companion to this legislative conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Ted. And then lastly, I'll just share some helpful resources that we hope you'll utilize during the legislative session. On our government affairs website or webpage of our website, we have a few resources. One being our government affairs email list. So each week during the legislative session, I'll send out an update sharing some hopefully helpful information about the bills that we're watching, how things shaped up that week, what we can anticipate the next week, and really try to keep everyone apprised of the happenings up on the Hill. And so if you're not subscribed to that and you'd like to be, you can do that through our website. Additionally, we have a bill tracker where we keep bill summaries and positions on specific bills and note whether it's a priority bill to WFRC or not. And it's a resource hopefully to you all to see what are the bills that I should be aware of or thinking about or that might impact me that are focused on the transportation, housing, economic development, air quality, land use kind of space. And not everything will be on there, of course, right? I have to limit the tracking to some extent, but hopefully the ones that would be most impactful or most interesting to you all would be included here. And then lastly, we also have an appropriations tracker. You can kind of see that on the bottom of the screen, where I try to keep note of what appropriations are moving through the process, if they're funded, included in specific funding bills. And that way at the end of session, we can look back and see, oh, wow, here's all the funding and investment that was put towards transportation this year, and is an easy way to keep track of that. So feel free to take a look at that as well. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We love your feedback, your engagement, your interest, and if there's ever anything that pops up that you have a question about or that you have an opinion about, we're interested to hear it. And so I'll put my contact in the chat, but feel free to reach out if you have anything. But it looks like Professor, you have a question.
Yes, Miranda, I had not realized what I think you said, which is that did you say the Supreme Court had, Utah Supreme Court had declared a transportation utility fee to be a legal fee as opposed to an illegal tax?
Correct. Yes.
Wow. That's a game changer.
Yes, it is. It is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Miranda. Great rundown. Obviously, we got a great start. Look forward, maybe in March, we can get a recap in terms of what we can experience. We appreciate that, and certainly keep us updated as changes take place. Is there any other questions for Miranda before we move on? Okay, thank you. And Miranda, again, great job. Let me, if I just can take a second, I want to step out of the agenda just for a second and ask Laura Hanson if she would just take a second to talk about guiding our growth. She would like a minute just to kind of introduce this concept, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate an opportunity to slip in, and I'll take just a couple of minutes. But I think most of you are aware that over the last year, we've been working very closely with WFRC, the League of Cities and Towns, and many, many other stakeholders on a big public engagement process, asking Utahns how they want the future of their communities to grow. Wonderfully, the results came back very close in alignment with the principles and what we see on the Wasatch Choice Vision. So that was serendipitous, but I think also reflective of the fact that, you know, we've done an awful lot of work in this space in the past. So we have completed our work for that first phase. We have final results from the public, and I see being passed out to you all is a little bit of a handout. These are, we hope you use as talking points as you are lobbying and working through the legislative process. This is just a reminder for you and for legislators as well of what Utahns said that they wanted for the future of their communities, types of things that they would like to support investments in. And they're obviously very well synchronized with the things that we've been talking about here today. So you can find all of the final survey results on the website, which I will drop in the chat. But also, thanks to Miranda for the quick update on the governor's budget recommendations. I just want you all to know that the feedback that you all provided us and that Utahns provided us through this process was a big input and data source as we were crafting the governor's budget recommendations. So you'll see a lot of ideas proposed in there that advance recommendations from the public. So that's all I have. Thank
Laura,
you.
thank you for a great introduction. Is any questions for Ms. Hanson on this discussion?
Well, I don't have a question. I just want to note that if you look in over Laura's left shoulder, you will see in her office the Wasatch Choice Vision map. So there's just and it's also over your right shoulder in our hanging on our wall here, Laura. So it's just a measure of the alignment that we have in our efforts. So thanks a lot, Laura.
Thanks,
Oh,
Andrew.
how do you pull that stuff out of a hat? It just amazes me. Okay, again, Laura, thank you. Well done. We do have number 6, which is potential impacts for the federal ozone air quality standards. And we've asked Andrew to go ahead and introduce this and talk about this, but I think we have other people who'd like to discuss it as well. Andrew?
We do. I'm going to be brief in introducing this and then turn to the real expert. That's Bryce Bird, who's the director of the Utah Division of Air Quality. So we at WFRC have a responsibility, actually under federal law and regulation, with regard to air quality. And that job is that we evaluate and determine that the transportation plans, the official transportation plans, conform to the applicable air quality standards. And in fact, if those transportation plans don't conform to the air quality standards, then restrictions can be imposed on our planning work and even beyond that on the use of transportation dollars, not just federal transportation dollars, but any regionally significant transportation project, including transit projects. So we're bringing this to you, and as I'm describing our work, I'll note Kip Billings here is our staff expert on this air quality conformity analysis. The reason that we're bringing this issue to you today, some of you may have already heard that specifically with regard to ozone, there are federal standards which we in our area have a significant challenge meeting. And I will just say, it's ironically not because our emissions are higher than in other areas in the country. In fact, they're lower than a lot of other areas, and the ones that we cause through our human activities are actually lower than in a good number of areas in the country. Particularly in transportation, we've had a significant decline in mobile source emissions, but more because of the inversion, the geology, the geography and topology that you all are aware of. This has been a significant challenge. And looming potentially on the horizon is the imposition of significant restrictions on transportation that would really affect not just our work, but all of our work in planning for and actually implementing transportation programs. And so we thought it was really important to share with you some more information about this topic and how we're working together to try to address it. And that's why Bryce Bird is here. So Bryce, can I turn it over to you?
There we go. Thank you. Again, Bryce Bird, Director of the Division of Air Quality. I don't always come with bad news, but today we do have a particular challenge, and we've been briefing a number of policymakers around the state, especially around this area, with respect to this ozone non-attainment challenge. Next slide. Or I guess scroll. The graphic there, despite the great progress we've made at addressing our winter inversion air pollution, and in fact, we're meeting that standard, and lots of great work that went into attaining that standard. We have a particular challenge, as was mentioned, with our summer ozone concentrations. And you can see that in that past 20-year period, that first 10 years, we saw great progress at bringing those ozone levels down in compliance with the federal air quality standards. But the red line in the middle of the messy graph is the current air quality standard. And you can see that there's a number of monitors that have not made progress in about the past 10 years. A couple reasons for that. One is the benefits that we saw from our past planning efforts that address winter air pollution provided great benefits. But we've seen warmer and drier summers, and ozone formation is driven not only by the emissions that are generated locally, but those that are transported by wildfires, international emissions, and natural sources of emissions. But what we typically see ozone exceedances when we have temperatures over 90 degrees and no cloud cover. If you remember the past few summers, we've seen very little monsoon activity in our valleys, and so we've seen a changing climate resulting in more days that we're able to form ozone from the precursors that are either transported into our area or are generated within our non-attainment areas. And I put this whole statewide graphic in there as well, so you can see that even the very rural areas of the state are close to that standard. And so it is a real challenge for us in Utah. Because of our elevation, we're also, the formation of ozone through the photochemical action on those precursor emissions is more effective because we're at elevation. And so Utah and Denver have particular challenges in our urban areas because of this phenomenon. And as Andrew mentioned, it's not because our emissions are greater than other areas, but it's because we have some particular challenges. Winter with the inversions and summertime with our elevation and transported ozone emissions. Right. So the Federal Clean Air Act, Congress in their—
Bryce, are you going to talk about the percentage?
Yes.
You're going to get there?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Go on.
Okay. I think so. The graphic was after. We'll make sure. If not, we'll come back to it. When Congress established the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, they put in the ability for EPA to impose sanctions on areas that continue to not meet air quality standards. This is built into the Clean Air Act, and our most recent ozone plan, which we submitted in October to EPA, we know will not show attainment with the standard. We know that our monitored values over the past 3 years continue to be well over the standard, and we're not able to identify enough effective strategies because of what we've done in the past. We can't add more to it to get more of these results in reduced ozone concentrations. And so because of that, there's a timeline that takes place as early as October of next year. We may enter into first a freeze, and then the sanctions that are available under the Clean Air Act. What that means for transportation planning is that projects that aren't included in the current transportation plan, those plans would have limited modifications available during that freeze period. That's the box there at the bottom. And then 2 years after that sanction clock starts, and then if we don't address it within the next 2 years, that's when the sanctions come into play, and I've got a future slide that talks about what those would be. But it is very important for you to understand this and to be partners in this as we address this through the 4 pathways that I'm going to mention here in just a minute. What does it mean for us? And so these are some UDOT highlights that we presented to legislators in the governor's office, just what type of projects would be impacted. And so any regional transportation project, regionally significant transportation project, you wouldn't be able to use federal funds for those projects or state funds for those regionally significant projects. And just to give an example of what some of those are in that planning horizon, these are major activities that you're all aware of and are planning for right now. So it is a big impact. And Andrew, go ahead.
Well, I just want to note, these sanctions could apply to both road and transit projects. And so you might be thinking, well, wait a second, that doesn't seem to make sense. If we have an air quality challenge, why would there be restrictions on our ability to do transit projects, which generally speaking are helpful to air quality? And that's because in part, the editorial comment, the EPA regulations are something of a blunt instrument. They just impose a restriction on the ability to modify plans and move forward on projects, transit projects or roadway projects.
And this is what Andrew alluded to is the particular challenge we have is that we can't do a lot locally to even address this. So this graphic represents the total sources of ozone precursors that are responsible for ozone formation on those hot summer days in Utah. You can see that the vast majority are either naturally occurring or regionally transported from other states. And in fact, what we can regulate locally within the non-attainment areas is about 5.8% of the total of the emissions. And we're currently about 10% over the standard. So even if we zeroed out all of the emissions in the Wasatch Front, we likely still wouldn't be able to attain that standard. So that's the challenge that we have. I'll let that soak in for just a minute.
Sink in for a moment. That in the ozone that we're dealing with, 86% of the causes of that ozone formation come from sources that are not human caused in Utah. 86%, blowing in from California, even China. As Bryce mentioned, even in our rural areas, we have ozone concentrations that are high because of that background ozone, and then also even certain trees produce ozone, and our elevation. So we have a really limited ability to tackle this issue. And I just want to say one thing sort of editorially again here. We all really care about human health and strive extremely hard collectively to reduce emissions that are harmful to human health, and have made a lot of progress in that regard. The challenge, however, is this dynamic that we control a relatively small percentage, and we're being held to standards that we could do just about everything, and it would be very hard for us to meet the applicable standards given our unique circumstances.
Next slide. So what is our strategy moving forward? And so, first one is we're making continuing to work with scientists at research universities and at our office to understand what we can do locally. So our first priority is attaining the federal health standard. That certainly is something that we're still working toward, identifying both understanding the chemistry better, understanding the controls that we could be put in place, and even understanding regional policies like wildfire mitigation that could be put in place to address that. Second is there is a provision in the Clean Air Act that would allow for exclusion of the international contribution, which again, on that last graphic, when you get a chance to look at that, is about equal to what we produce locally is actually transported into our area from China or other places. It kind of circulates around the world. And so there is a provision in the Clean Air Act if we could demonstrate that we would have attained the standard, but for that contribution of international emissions, that we could then check that box and avoid the sanctions. Third, unfortunately, in the world we live in, we are also preparing a litigation strategy. There are some options if EPA rejects the planning that we have, the arguments that we make, there's a chance to have a judge look at that, or a panel of judges in the case of the circuit courts. Being able to look at that, making sure that EPA is correctly applying the provisions of the Clean Air Act, and that they're not unfairly or unreasonably impacting the state of Utah and some other states. And then the last one is this multi-state effort. So we're not the only state that's in this boat. There's 18 other states that are currently dealing with this sanction provisions in the Clean Air Act. So there's a governor's effort to work with those states to both look for congressional action to perhaps modify those provisions in the Clean Air Act, or to work with the EPA to modify some of the discretion they have under the Clean Air Act to not impose those sanctions while an area is showing that they're doing everything they can to make reasonable progress at attaining the standard. So that's the path we're on, and that's the quick update. One other ask that I'd have is at the legislative session, always, air quality regulations that impact people. They cost money, and we drive technology, we drive innovation with emissions, and that has impacts on people. So every session we see bills that try to roll that back. And so some of the efforts that we're going through right now is to help understand it's a big deal. Anything that we roll back on existing regulation makes it even more difficult to show that we're making that reasonable progress. It makes it more difficult to show the courts that we're doing everything we can locally to address that pollution. And so that's something that we always focus on every legislative session, to make sure that what we have in place is effective, that people understand that because of this challenge that we've had to identify controls or technologies that are maybe driving and pushing the envelope on what some may think is reasonable, but they are very important, and they have been effective at getting us the progress that we've seen so far.
Yep, Bryce, I appreciate that. Just an incredible story. Obviously, we got to watch this one real close. I do believe we have a comment. Professor, you have a question you want to ask?
Thank you. And thank you for that great presentation. So it's a question. It's also a statement. With Farron Piers, I was involved in the Atlanta conformity lapse, which, Bryce, you would be familiar with. And we found that a specific project, Atlantic Steel, which became Atlantic Station, needed road improvements and a bridge over a highway to the Arts Center station, rail station in Atlanta. And we used the Project Excel exception to get those, even though there was a conformity lapse in Atlanta, just like here, to get those projects approved. So the question is, does that Project Excel exception or provision still exist? And could we, for example, use it to get a lot of downtown development approved and road improvements with that? Because ultimately, and this is what we showed for Atlantic Steel, it's better than the alternative to have downtown development, or this was midtown development in Atlanta, rather than outlying development would actually improve air quality. And that's the rationale behind Project Excel.
I'm not familiar, and I would have to look at how it could apply to us. Again, this is not a lapse. This, a lapse is the normal planning process. If conformity plans aren't able to show conformity with air quality budgets, this is a freeze and sanctions, which is another provision in the Clean Air Act than general conformity.
I'll just add, Sir Professor Ewing, thank you. I'm looking at Kip Billings, and I'll just ask Kip to follow up with you to get a little more information about that provision that you're discussing after this meeting. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
can
you,
I
Bryce.
also, I note Kevin Cromar, Mr. Chair, Kevin Cromar, who's online and has not only raised his hand, but I wanted to give him a moment particularly because he's a member of the Air Quality Board and might have some thoughts on this. I know Mayor Tran has a comment as well, but is that okay? Can we go to Kevin as a starting point?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. One, I just want to let you guys know that Bryce is tremendous. He is a real asset for the state. He has a job where he has to not only know all the technical details, he has to be able to navigate a really dicey, he has a boss in the governor's office. He has a reactive legislature. He manages that so adeptly. He's tremendous. So Bryce, I think you're wonderful. One quick comment is we'll never have our transportation funding restricted because we're not meeting the ozone standard. There's lots of places that haven't met the standards for years and years. They don't have their transportation funding restricted. We will have it restricted if we fail to meet the planning requirements because we're in non-attainment. So there's provisions that we have to meet. If we're not able to meet them, there's opportunities to kind of pivot and have alternative actions. So we have to do actions in our planning process. And if we go back to slide 6 on Bryce's slides there real quick. So number 1 is where we want to focus. Don't hold your breath to 2 to 4. I know they have to exhaust every avenue, but really number 1 is where we want to put our effort. And for this committee, if we really want to help with this, the one thing we could consider doing is with our TAC, our Technical Advisory Committee, we should take Bryce up on his suggestion to look at our requirements around the non-road mobile sources, construction equipment, our requirements on what's used. That can make a real difference for some of our reasonable further progress requirements. Bryce can't do that alone at DAQ. The legislature is not going to take it up on their own, but I think that Wasatch Front through the TAC with DAQ, I think we should have some conversations around that topic and see if we can't move that forward to make that planning progress sufficient so we don't lose out on federal transportation dollars. So I'd make that suggestion, Mr. Chair. I don't know if it needs to be a motion or more discussion, but I think there's an action there we should consider to help Bryce and DAQ so we don't lose our transportation funding opportunities.
Kevin, can I just thank you. One clarifying point. You're saying the area that you would suggest we have some more discussion about through our technical advisory committees, you said non-road sources. Can you just explain what you mean? Or did I mishear?
No, you heard me correctly. Non-road mobile really is construction equipment. That's an area we haven't really tackled before. We actually have quite polluting equipment in Utah in that sector. If we work together, that's something we can make progress on in a way that would help this problem that Bryce is talking about.
Yeah, if I could put that into context, when we look at our emissions inventory for the current ozone plan, the non-road engines, so these are, as mentioned, anything with wheels and without a license plate. So it's construction equipment, heavy construction equipment. A lot of that equipment is old. It's not meeting the same standards that on-highway equipment, diesel equipment is meeting. It would also include rail as well. And we look at the inventory, the non-road emissions are about equal to the on-road emissions when it comes to oxides of nitrogen. And so it is a huge category. And unfortunately, there are federal preemptions from us regulating those directly. We have some in-use requirements, but through contracting, other areas have used contracting requirements. So whenever a major road project would be done, they require the latest tier of clean engine technology to be used during those projects, rather than, as I mentioned, sometimes the lowest bid is not the best technology, and those engines are particularly polluting on the same scale as all of the on-highway trucks.
Okay, Bryce, you certainly have opened a lot of eyes. I think there was another chart you wanted to talk about, but before that, Mayor Trent had a comment.
Oh, thank you. I just, Kevin answered most of my questions. My last question would be, how long do we have to implement a plan? Is there a time period? Is it years? Is it months?
So the current plan was submitted. We're expecting EPA to reject that plan, and then that starts the requirement for the next planning phase for a serious non-attainment plan. That'd be in the 2026 timeframe. So we've already started that planning effort, and moving toward 2026 is the next deadline or milestone that we meet with EPA. So during this current legislative session, there are budget asks that the division has been approved for in the governor's budget. One additional planning staff that we're looking to add to our staff. Oh, and then the other one is just highlighting that the Air Quality Board has proposed additional regulations covering two-stroke lawn and garden equipment, basically controlling the activity of that equipment during high ozone days during the summertime. A 3-year implementation phase, the first year being imposed on institutional, so government, large users of lawn equipment. Second year going to residents, and then the third year going to small contractors in the lawn and garden business, and then combining that with incentives to be able to move them to cleaner equipment. We've done some pilots with the Division the State Division of Facilities Construction and Management. And got feedback that the employees that used the electric equipment found that it was actually easier on their ears, easier on the vibrations are less, and they were able to use it all day long, this modern electric equipment. So got really good feedback about the adoption. Several universities have moved that way as well and have got good feedback there as well. So again, we think it's something that, as I put in context earlier, we have particular challenges with meteorology, with topography, with transport emissions. So we need to look at every technology in order to show that we're making reasonable progress at attaining these standards.
Mr. Chair, as a final comment to wrap up here, bringing this back to this committee, you see the last point right there. It says UDOT is working with transportation partners, that's WFRC, UTA, others, to ensure that transportation plans are updated before a potential freeze. Now, again, Bryce noted, and to Mayor Tran's question about the timing here, it may be in the October timeframe that EPA rejects the ozone SIP. I always try to get my words right when talking about this. Rejects the ozone SIP, the state implementation plan, and then a freeze comes into effect, which means that we have a limited ability, significantly limited ability to change the regional transportation plan or the transportation improvement program. We're frozen with what's in the plan at that moment, okay? Andrea Olson from UDOT we're working with also, of course. So what you're saying here is that we're working on, and we do this normally, Jory, right? We routinely evaluate and update our plans and our programs to make sure they are current. It has a particular importance perhaps now because of the potential of this freeze coming down and limiting our ability to make future updates. Therefore, what you should anticipate as a committee is in our next meeting, Regional Growth Committee in March, we will be bringing to you a proposed amendment to the Regional Transportation Plan. Now, again, this is routine process, but there is a possibility it might be the last amendment that we could make for a while of anything that is regionally significant. So that's just a little look ahead why we wanted to have this conversation here in advance of looking into March and then ultimately action on a Regional Transportation Plan update in May. Did I say that right, Jory? Thank you. Okay.
Okay, great comment. Any more comments or questions for Bryce? Okay, anything online? Okay, hey, thank you. Okay, very informative. We're gonna have to watch this one close. I've got to be careful here. I'm about ready to buy some generators. I'm questioning now whether or not that's a good move. We're going to, yeah, solar. We're going to drop item number 7, the video. We can do that in March. So if it's a time, we're running a little long. We'll go ahead and carry that requirement into our next meeting. Is there any other business, any other issues that we want to bring up before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Okay, with that, I want to remind you, as stated, March 21st, okay, our next Regional Growth Committee, next week, next week, Thursday, there will be a full Wasatch Front Regional Council meeting. Definitely some things that happen in Salt Lake City will be moved forward based on this recommendation. We're excited about that. And there may, I assume, some other things that we brought up today will be also mentioned to the council as a whole. Again, with that then, do I have a motion then to adjourn? Okay, thank you, Mayor. Do I have a second? Oh, I'm glad somebody said second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. And again, thank you. Great, great information.
Thank you so much. And for those of you that are staying here for the Salt Lake Council of Governments meeting, stay here for the meeting. It'll be in this room.